Good evening, all. Okay, welcome you all to this Journal Club series. So I am happy to be here as a passionate volunteer and a coordinator for this present the Journal Club. And I will be presenting the article along with my other teammates. So I just brief the Journal Club and just introduce my colleagues. Okay, this is the first Journal Club coming out from the Pan India team. So Journal Club is a platform for the members to discuss and critically evaluate research articles related to the field of interest. So the main goal is to stay updated with the latest research, fostering critical thinking and promoting a scholarly discussions. So just to introduce the presenter, myself, I'm Dr. Pritham, completed my PhD in Food Science and Nutrition from JKVK Bangalore. So I have been volunteering in the Pan India over the last 5 months. I had an opportunity to contribute myself in the various nutrition focused initiatives. So I just introduce Dr. Sindhura and Deshna. Please, can you just introduce yourself, ma'am? Dr. Sindhura?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Sindhura. I have done my MBBS. I have done my fellowship in family medicine, and I'm also a certified nutritionist. And I'm associated with Pan India as an ambassador at Pan India for the past 3 to 4 months. And I'm really happy to be associated with Pan India and really glad to be organizing this particular Pan India First Journal Club. And I hope you all really enjoy today's session and take away a lot of interesting points as well. Just thank you everyone for attending this particular journal club. Thank you.
Good evening, all. Good evening, all. I am Ms. Deshna Oswal. I am a PhD scholar in public health nutrition, and I have completed my MSc Nutrition and Dietetics. Currently, I am a volunteer of PAN since 3 months, and yeah, welcome you all. I just welcome you all.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sindhura and Deshna. Okay, we'll just go to know the what actually the PAN is. Yes. So everyone knows the activities we are actually conducting under the PAN India. It's one of the branch, okay, of the PAN International. It's a PAN is a global NGO. It's an organization which is on a mission to alleviate the disease and issues related to dietary choices of the people. So the PAN plays in advancing the nutrition within the medical education, a healthcare system, and its main motto is to incorporate nutrition as a core component of a healthcare by training doctors, healthcare professionals in the nutrition intervention and facilitating them with the giving the nutrition education. Even the nutrition education we have given in the medical schools as well, so that we can create a positive impact on a clinical practice. And we also aim to advance the research in the field by creating more data, resources, and tools. So, and also we are actively involved in a public awareness campaigns about the nutrition, and we collaborate with the organization that share our missions, okay, to reach more people and also promote the importance of nutrition and overall health. The PAN has got a highly skilled and exceptional core team, that is Executive Director Dr. Sanjana Sikri, Medical Director Dr. Rajina Shahin, Advisor Dr. Ashish Abarwal, and the Program Manager Shruti Sharma. And also we have got volunteers. These are all the volunteers, and also there are the ambassadors. Yes, these are all the ambassadors. So actually, the Pan India is still in an expansion mode, and also we welcome you all healthcare professionals, doctors, to just be as a volunteer or the ambassadors, so that you can just dedicate few hours of your time to various opportunities, so that you can contribute yourself. So by becoming a part of the PAN, you can actively participate in our missions to educate the healthcare professionals, and also about the nutrition intervention also. So with this small introduction, we'll just slip into the journal club, the first journal club, as I said. So I request the Dr. Sindhura just to take over.
Thank you, Dr. Pritham. Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Sindhura. I'm an ambassador at Pan India, as I've already mentioned. So, firstly, I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out and attending this particular journal club. And yes, today we'll be talking about a study which compares or which discusses about the nutrition status among the various dietary groups. Okay, so before me taking you into the actual part of the study, so let me give you a little briefing about why is this particular study important at this particular moment. Because food systems have the potential to nurture human health and support environmental sustainability. However, they are currently threatening both. So we as healthcare professionals have a pivotal role in transforming the food systems globally. The government bodies and the health authorities are increasingly recommending a predominant plant-based diet, that is, a diet which is rich in fruits, vegetables, pulses, whole grains, nuts, which is low in red meat and moderate in dairy, eggs, poultry, and fish, which is going to be definitely beneficial for both human health and planetary health. So our current food system is not sustainable and is threatening climate stability and ecosystem resilience. So in addition to that, large part of world's population is suffering from malnutrition, and the major cause of it is unhealthy diets. So unhealthy diets and malnutrition are also among the top 10 risk factors contributing to the global burden of disease. Even according to 2019 8 Lancet report, if we see, it states that more than 820 million people have insufficient food and many more consume low quality diets, leading to hidden hunger, that is micronutrient deficiencies. And it's also been a contributing factor to diet-related obesity, non-communicable diseases, and hence it proposed a diet called as a planetary health diet as a sustainable solution. Even the similar guidelines have been given by the FAO and WHO as well in the same year. The study that we'll be looking into today is, or discussing is, the nutrient intake and status in adults consuming plant-based diets compared to meat eaters. So this is a systematic review. This study is a systematic review which has been done by Mr. Newfingler and Islander. And this study was published in 2021. And the duration of this particular study is approximately 20 years. Over the period of from 2000 to 2020, they've collected different studies, and this is what they have presented as this particular systematic review. And the aim of this particular study is to assess the nutrient intake and nutrient status in adult populations consuming plant-based diets, mainly vegetarian and vegan, with that of meat eaters. So before we going into the actual methodology, so why is this particular study important? So just let me give you a small background. Why do we have to discuss about this sustainable diet? Because currently the world is facing a grave nutrition situation where 2 billion people are suffering with hidden hunger, specifically the lack of micronutrients or micronutrient deficiency, specifically iron and vitamin A. 2 billion adults are overweight or obese. 88% of the countries are facing a serious burden of either 2 or 3 different forms of malnutrition. So, and the world is completely off the track in terms of nutrition targets. And if you see globally, 1 in 9 people are either hungry or undernourished. 1 in 3 people are overweight and obese. And even the underweight, this particular system persists in the poorest countries with rates up to 10 times higher compared to the richest countries. Whereas in contrast, in the developed countries and rich countries, we can see the problem is with the overweight and obesity. So poor diet and resulting malnutrition are not just simply because of a matter of personal choices. A lot of people are not able to afford it, and either they cannot able to access the nutritious diet. So food and health systems need to be transformed, and this is the time to act, where we all together combine together, put an effort to build an equitable, resilient, and sustainable food and health systems. Now, this is just the background of this particular study. Why is it important? Now, the methodology of this particular study will be taken over by my colleague, Ms. Deshna. Deshna, you can take over. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. Methodology, that is materials and methods of this particular study, which is divided into search strategy, inclusion and exclusion criteria, data extraction, data handling, and data analysis. Next. Search strategy, this being a systematic review, they systematically searched for articles which compared energy and nutrient intake or status of adults from consuming plant-based diet along with those consuming meat-based diets. The articles were searched on PubMed database, and mesh terms, that is medical subject headings, were used to search articles. Along with this, they used cross-referencing from various systematic review and meta-analysis. Next. Before starting the search of this study, like various articles, they defined particular terms in order to keep consistency over the data. So for instance, vegan, according to this study, vegan was defined as people consuming no meat, fish, dairy, eggs, or not during days of dietary assessment, or at least less than once per month, or self-defined vegans were known as vegans. Vegetarian, people who do not have meat, fish, or not during assessment days, or who consume less than once per month, or who define themselves as vegetarians. Pesco-vegetarians, people who had no meat or not during dietary assessment or less than once per month, or self-defined as pesco-vegetarian. Semi-vegetarian, that is meat and fish less than once per week but greater than once per month, or self-defined as semi-vegetarian. And finally, meat eaters was defined as people consuming meat more than once per week, or were self-defined as meat eaters. Next slide. Inclusion and exclusion criteria for this particular study was divided into 4 sections, depending upon the type of design: diet, outcome parameters, and study population. Type of the studies which were observational or interventional studies which compared nutrient intake or status of subject following a plant-based diet with subject following conventional diet with meat, and other studies reporting only plant-based diet were included, while generic review, case studies, and articles not published in English language were excluded. Diet, in diet section, only voluntary self-selected diets were included, while imposed or pre-designed plant-based diet, overly restrictive plant-based diet, healthy diet were excluded. Outcome parameters included in the study was dietary intake of energy, UFA, ALA, EPA, DHA, dietary intake or nutritional status of micronutrients, and bone markers. Or those studies which used these as the outcome parameters were included in the study. For study population, only those studies who reported healthy adults, like who included healthy adults that is greater than 18 years of age, were included, while studies including pregnant and lactating mothers, athletes, and population with specific disease were excluded from this particular study. Next slide now. For data extraction, so initially after searching for articles from PubMed, the study searched 1406 articles. They were then screened for title and abstract according to the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then were assessed for eligibility depending upon the full studies. Full study were read by 2 authors. So that's what initially the authors removed duplicates, followed by screening by 2 authors, and then finally data was extracted from 147 studies. Data extracted included population characteristics, study location, reported dietary patterns, and publication date. For each dietary pattern, mean, standard deviation, standard error, median, 10th, 25th, 75th, 90th percentile, or range of parameters of nutrient intake and nutritional status was extracted. Along with that, prevalence of any inadequate intake or deficiency from the studies were also extracted. Next slide. To handle the data as defined already, the study had defined the terms, followed by those studies who did not distinct pesco and semi-vegetarians. This particular review included them into vegetarians. Median, interquartile range, standard error, standard deviations ranges were converted into mean and standard deviation. Only data that were based on definition of WHO and Institute of Medicine were included in order to keep consistency. Baseline data from interventional studies were included, and weighted averages were taken if data was separated on the basis of subgroups. This is how they handled the data in order to include in the study. Next. For data analysis, the authors checked for correctness and outliers. Nutrient intake from food was assessed and analyzed. Average intake was compared with EAR, that is estimated average requirement. For iron and zinc specifically, they were compared with bioavailability adjusted EAR, and finally they compared the nutrient intake of different dietary patterns using independent t-test, and also they tried to get the prevalence of deficiencies from various studies. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I'll ask Pritham ma'am. I'll request Pritham ma'am to continue with the results and discussion.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sindhura and Deshna, for giving this introduction and the methodology of this particular article. So let's come to this results and discussion part. So here the authors, they have given the first that mainly they have talked the nutrient intake and the status in the adults who are consuming the plant-based, which are compared to that of the meat eaters. So as discussed earlier, that's the few studies they have taken in the different places. Okay, they have collected the data at different places. So coming to the energy intake. So energy intake, the average energy intake among all the dietary patterns, that is the meat eaters, they had 2,101 kilocalories per day. The vegans, they had 1,947 kilocalories per day. And the vegetarian has 2,098 kilocalories per day. So that's as per the ICMR RDA, it's 1,800 to 2,200 kilocalories per day actually. So I think the all dietary patterns, they are meeting their energy intake levels. So coming to the next, these are the abbreviations we just come in my future slides. That's the future datas. That's the dietary reference intakes. That is the RDA. That is the recommended dietary allowance. It meets the needs of 97 to 98% of healthy people. The EAR is an estimated average requirements. It meets the needs of half of the healthy people. So AI is an adequate intake. It's an amount that's assumed to be an adequate. So coming to the first figure. So before I just jump into the results, I'll just brief out that what actually this, I know that everyone will be knowing this graphical representation. I'll just give a quick glance on this. Okay, this is a box plot graphical representation here where the authors, they have just distributed, they have used this as a graphical representation for their data distribution. So the box plot is the box which represents actually that is the interquartile range. So which is the range between 25th to 75th percentile of the data. So the line inside, okay, the box that represents the median. So which is the value that separates the data into two equal halves. Then the whiskers that extends from the box, that is the minimum and the maximum values. Okay. So any data that points that are outside the range, so that's are plotted. Though these are the data points that are as an individual points. They take it as an individual points and are considered as an outliers. So in this paper, this is what they have used for this distribution of the nutrient intakes in a different dietary patterns. Okay, here is the first, the figure A that gives a graph that shows the mean intake of various nutrients for the meat eaters, vegans, and the vegetarians. That's the protein as well as the fiber is there. So where the protein, it is a dotted lines that represents the lower limit of the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. Okay, that's the acceptable, that is the what the AMDR is what the adequate intakes. Okay. Here the protein intake was that reports that the protein intake was higher in case of meat eaters when it is compared to the vegetarians and the vegans. Okay, that's we can clearly note out that the points there, the intake was lower in the vegetarians, that is 13.4% of total daily energy intakes, and the vegan has got 12.9%, and the meat eaters has got 16%. Okay, which shows that suggests that it is possible to meet the protein needs on even being on a plant-based diet also. So how it can we can make it by planning carefully with a variety of protein sources, and the average the intake was there that for everyone for all the dietary patterns, they above the lower limit of the acceptable macronutrient, they have set it to the 10% of the energy intakes. So coming to the fiber intake, so that it shows that the recommended intake of the fiber for the men and the women, where we can see that blue dotted line is for the men and the pink dotted line is for the women's. So the recommended intake of the fiber that varies depending on, we know that the fiber, it depends on age, sex, and even other factors. But generally it ranges from 25 to 38 grams per day for the adults. So the adequate levels of the fiber intake, they have said 25 grams for the women's and 38 grams for the men. So across all the studies, the average fiber intake was highest in case of vegans, that is 44 grams per day, as followed that the plant-based diet, because we know that the plant-based are the diets, the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and the legumes, they are the rich source of fiber. Then followed by the vegetarians, and the lowest is the meat eaters. That the vegetarian, and one thing is the average fiber intake of the vegetarians, we can see that was sufficient to meet the adequate intake for the women, but not for the men. It mainly depends upon the food choices that what they have made it. So coming to the next, that is the PUFA, this figure which shows the PUFA intakes and the ALA, alpha linolenic acid intakes. PUFA is a polyunsaturated fatty acids, where the intake was the highest in the vegans, that is 8.84% of the energy intakes, and the lowest is the meat eaters, that is 5.95%. So where the vegetarians had got 6.79% intakes. So this is mainly due to the plant-based diets. They are the rich source of PUFA, such as the nuts, seeds, or the vegetable vegetable oils, that is the LA, linoleic acid. So in contrast, there are the meat eaters, they tend to consume more saturated fatty acids, which is where the from the animal products. So the in total, or the average PUFA intake for the meat eaters was just below the AMGR. Okay, that's meaning that they may not be consuming enough PUFA to meet their recommended intake levels. That means they are deficit. Usually what the authors they have done is the data they have collected separately for the different types of PUFAs. That's the ALA, EPA, and the DHA. So because they have the different dietary sources and health benefits. Okay, the ALA, which usually comes from the plant source, and EPA and the DHA, it's in a further slide, they are come from the animal source. So coming to the ALA, in whole, if you talk that, come to the ALA, that's alpha linolenic acid. So that's the mean they tend to be, the ALAs tend to be higher in higher. Just a minute, there is a disturbances from the baby. I'll just Sindhura ma'am, please can you just take it out? Hello.
Right, I'll continue. Thank you, Dr. Pritham. So coming to the ALA, the ALA, the plant sources of the ALA are flax seeds, chia seeds, and vitamins. And if we see the data also here, the ALA in the meat eaters is around 1.08 grams per day, whereas in vegans you can say it is 2.69 grams per day, whereas in vegetarians it is 1.36 grams per day. So definitely the vegans have a higher range of the ALA intake. Okay. Next one, if we move on to the EP and DHA, definitely EP and DHA are rich in the animal sources, right? Animal source of foods. So we can see the EPA values are higher in the meat eaters, whereas in vegans and vegetarians, they are reduced. But if we see the DHA again, it is very minimal in vegans and vegetarians, whereas it is high in meat eaters. So because usually the plant-based foods are predominant in ALA compared to EP and DHA. Now, if we move on to the vitamin A intake, so out of this particular vitamin A intake, this particular study has been taken from out of, the results have been taken from out of 17 studies. And in that, for all dietary patterns, vitamin A intakes were well above the EAR. Usually the EAR of vitamin A intake for females, it is 500 micrograms, whereas for males, it is 625 micrograms. So excess beta carotene status and vitamin A status is based on serum plasma or retinol levels. So overall, if we see the status data for vitamin A, it is well above the cutoff levels for all the three dietary patterns. Okay, so it's well above the EAR in all the three dietary groups. So when it comes to the vitamin B1, the similar fashion follows with vitamin B1 as well. The average vitamin B1 intake was well above the EAR for all the three dietary groups as well. Then if we see here, the beta carotene tended, when we check this status, the beta carotene tended to be lower in vegetarians compared to meat eaters and vegans. And vitamin A status was similar across all dietary patterns and well above the cutoff for deficiency. Now, if we move on to the vitamin B2 intake, across all studies, the average vitamin B2 intake was similar for all dietary patterns, and the mean intake across all studies was also the above ER. If we see for all the three different dietary groups, the values were very much above the ER for both males and females. Now, when we move on to the niacin, here you can see across various studies, it has been observed that vegetarians tend to have slightly lower niacin intake with average intake of 18.8 milligrams per day in the vegetarians. On the other hand, vegans have a slightly higher average niacin intake of 24.3 milligrams per day. And while meat eaters tend to have the highest average intake of 25.2 milligrams per day. But among all the three groups, the values were well above the ER only. But among those, if we see, the meat eaters have slightly highest amount of the niacin intake. If we move on to the next vitamin, that is vitamin B6, the average vitamin B6 intake found to be higher in vegans and compared to vegetarians and meat eaters across all the studies analyzed in this particular systematic review. And furthermore, the mean intakes from all dietary patterns exceeded the EAR as well. For all the three groups, they are well above the EAR as well. Okay, so indicating that sufficient intake of vitamin B6 for most individuals is there in this particular studies. And the EAR for this vitamin B6 is set as 1.1 milligram per day. Now, when we move on to the folate, that is vitamin B9, the vegans, the value, the result, what we can see here is 490 micrograms per day for vegans, whereas it is 403 micrograms per day for vegetarians, almost similar, just a few points down. And when it comes to meat eaters, it's a little, it's quite low in meat eaters, which is 331 micrograms per day. But we can see the EAR among all the three dietary groups, they are well above the EAR. So the average, the EAR set for the folate or the vitamin B9 is around 320 micrograms per day. So definitely all the three groups are above. Like the meat eaters are just slightly above it, but vegans and vegetarians definitely had a very good margin over here. So coming to the status, most studies show similar vitamin B6 levels in vegetarians, vegans, and meat eaters, but some studies in Slovakia, Germany, Netherlands show higher levels in vegetarians, and 2 studies in Taiwan, they have showed lower levels in vegetarians as well. Coming to the folate status. Plant-based diets tend to have higher folate status than meat eaters, and folate deficiency is more prevalent in meat eaters. So if we move on to the next vitamin, that is vitamin B12. Here you can see the vitamin B12 values are well above the below the EAR for almost vegans and vegetarians, and they are high for meat eaters because obviously the vitamin B12 is rich in animal-based foods. It is very difficult to get it from the plant-based foods. So hence the values are below the EAR. Yes, now my colleague Dr. Pritham will be continuing, so I'll be handing over to her. She is back. Okay, she's not available. So let me continue further. Coming to the vitamin C intake, if we see the results of the vitamin C, we can see the status, the intake of vitamin C is very high in vegans, which is 213 milligrams per day, whereas in vegetarians, it is 166 milligrams per day. And coming to meat eaters, it is low, that is 137 milligrams per day. So, and definitely, though in meat eaters it is less compared to vegans, in all the three dietary groups, they are well above the EAR, both in all the three dietary groups. Now, if you see the status, the vitamin B12 deficiency prevalence ranges from 0 to 16% in meat eaters, while in vegetarians and vegans, it ranges from 0 to 75% and 4 to 73% respectively. When it comes to vitamin C, the vegetarians and vegans have higher vitamin C levels compared to meat eaters. Now, if we see the vitamin E intake, on average, vegans had the highest vitamin E intake, that is 19.2 milligram per day, followed by the vegetarians with 12.6 milligrams per day and meat eaters with 10.8 milligrams per day. So among vegans, the average vitamin E intake was well above the EAR. This is the EAR of vitamin E, and for vegans, it is well above the EAR. But in meat eaters, on the other hand, had an average intake below the EAR, with a significant proportion not meeting the recommended intake levels. When we move on to the vitamin D levels, the intake, if you see, meat eaters had the second highest average vitamin intake, with an average intake of 4.17 micrograms per day. Next is by vegetarians, that is 2.67 micrograms, and in vegans, 1.52 micrograms per day. Whether it be any group, whether it's vegetarian, non-vegetarian, or vegan, all the three groups are below the EAR only. So the EAR for vitamin D is approximately 10 micrograms per day, and all the three dietary groups were below it. Okay, even after supplementation, also not much significant difference has been seen in terms of vitamin D. Okay, so next we will be moving on to the next vitamin, the status we'll be looking here. For the status, they have measured the serum and plasma alpha tocopherol levels for vitamin E. Vitamin E status was similar across all the dietary patterns, just slight variations were almost similar. It's 25.4, 25.5, and 20.5 respectively in meat eaters, vegetarians, and vegans. Only one study reported 3.8% prevalence of vitamin E deficiency among the vegans. Now, coming to the vitamin D deficiency, it is prevalent among all the three groups. Okay, a little dominant in the plant-based diet compared to the meat eaters, but definitely this is a common deficiency across all the dietary patterns. Next, if we move on to the calcium intake. On average, vegetarians had slightly higher calcium intake, followed by meat eaters. We can see the values as well. The intake in meat eaters is around 858 milligrams per day. In vegans, it is 838 milligrams per day. And in vegetarians, it is 895 milligrams per day. And we can also see the mean intake for all dietary patterns were slightly above. So this is the actual intake, and this is the EAR. For all the three patterns, it's slightly above the EAR. Okay. Not quite a margin, but definitely slightly. We just crossed the EAR border. When we talk about iodine, On average, vegans had the lowest iodine intake, followed by vegetarians and meat eaters. We can also see the values here. The highest in the meat eaters with 170, next vegetarians 146, and in vegans 111, because iodine is also most predominantly found in the animal sourced foods like dairy and seafood, etc. So when coming to the iodine status, most studies comparing iodine status across diet groups showed lower iodine status in vegetarians and vegans compared to meat eaters, with a higher prevalence of iodine deficiency in vegans. So if you move on to the iron and magnesium, regarding the iron, on average, vegans had the highest iron intake, followed by vegetarians and meat eaters. Why? Because see, if we see even the ER also, it is not same as with the meat eaters, because in people who consume plant-based diet, we should not be referring to the regular ER of iron, but instead we need to be referring to the bioavailability adjusted ER, because the kind of iron that is present in plant-based foods is non-heme iron, whereas in animal-based foods is heme iron. If we see the absorption of the heme iron, it is almost 51% of it can be absorbed, whereas non-heme iron, it's only max 15%. So the absorption is pretty much less, though the ion concentration is more, but the absorption is less. If we have to increase the bioavailability, the intake of the ion in people who follow plant-based diets has to be increased. Otherwise, it might lead to ion deficiencies. And if we come to the magnesium intake, across the included studies, vegans had again the highest average magnesium intake with 503 milligrams per day. Next, followed by the vegetarians with 373 milligrams per day. And next, at the last, with meat eaters of 302 milligrams per day. And we can see the mean intake were below the EAR for if we see the vegans and vegetarians, they had average magnesium intakes above the EAR. For both male and female, it is above the EAR. When it comes to the meat eaters, for males are above the EAR, okay. Females are above the EAR, whereas males are below the EAR. Since the blue line is still above the recommended intake, the intake is quite below the EAR. So the problem is specifically here for the male meat eaters compared to the female meat eaters. And coming to the iron status, it tends to be higher in meat eaters than in vegetarians and vegans, with vegetarian women having particularly low levels of iron. And anemia prevalence is also higher in vegetarians and vegans than in meat eaters, but mean hemoglobin values were almost similar across the dietary patterns. If we move on to the phosphorus intake, again, across the included studies, average phosphorus intake was similar among different dietary patterns, including vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters, and the values and the intakes were also pretty much higher above the ER. And when it comes to zinc, across the included studies, the average zinc intake was similar among different dietary patterns, including vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters. However, when comparing the zinc, again here we have to take the bioavailability adjusted ER for zinc as well, because the dietary fiber and just likewise, the iron absorption is decreased in plant-based diets also. There'll be decreased bioavailability of the zinc. Hence, we need to increase the intake amount of the zinc in people who follow the plant-based diets. And to ensure sufficient zinc intake, individuals should be following plant-based diets should pay attention to including the right kind of zinc-rich foods in their diet, such as legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. Additionally, for these kind of things to increase the bioavailability in terms of iron or zinc, we should also be focusing on the preparation techniques also, the processing techniques also. For example, the plant-based foods contains the anti-nutritional factors, right? So if we have to, so those anti-nutritional factors, they'll be blocking the absorption of the nutrients. So how can we minimize those anti-nutritional factors is using different processing and preparation techniques like steaming, it could be fermentation, it could be soaking, it could be milling, it could be, or the exposure to the heat treatment. So these are different techniques through which we can minimize the presence of the anti-nutritional factors, and we can increase the bioavailability of the different nutrients among the plant-based foods. So coming to the status, the vegetarians and vegans tend to have slightly lower zinc status than meat eaters, with vegans having a considerably higher prevalence of zinc deficiency. So just to summarize the results and the discussion part, if I just have to summarize in just one particular slide to give you a better assimilation of the different nutrients and different among the different various groups, if we see, definitely we can conclude, or we can come to a point that there were nutrient inadequacies across all the dietary patterns. But if you see among the vegans are at a risk of inadequacy for EPA, DHA, vitamin B12, D, calcium, iodine, iron, and zinc. And when it comes to vegetarians, almost the same nutrients, they are at risk of inadequacy. In addition, a little bit of fiber as well. When coming to the meat eaters are at a higher risk of inadequacy for fiber, PUFA, ALA, vitamin D, E, folate, calcium, and magnesium. When it comes to the favorable high intake among vegans, definitely fiber, PUFA, ALA, vitamin B1, B6, C, E, folate, and magnesium are definitely at a favorably high intake. Almost the same in vegetarians as well, the PUFA, ALA, vitamin C, folate, and magnesium. And when it comes to meat eaters, the protein, niacin, vitamin B12, zinc intakes are at a favorably high amounts. So if these plant-based diets are generally better for the health, for the human health as well as the planetary health, but most importantly, instead of simply consuming the plant-based diets, we should be focusing on a nutritionally balanced plant-based diet, which is going to give us a better result so that we don't land up in the inadequacies or the nutrient deficiencies. So as discussed above, when someone is making a transition to a diet with predominant plant foods or less or no animal foods, they can definitely improve certain nutrient parameters like the dietary fiber, B9, B1, B6, vitamin C, vitamin E, PUFA, magnesium, and definitely the plant-based diets are also low in saturated fats, they are low in dietary cholesterol, and they're also low caloric foods compared to the meat-based diets. And the conclusion, if you have to conclude, definitely there are dietary inadequacy in all groups, but following a proper, well-balanced or nutritionally balanced plant-based diets that we follow by involving or by taking diverse nutrient-dense plant foods, we can definitely make sure that we don't land up in the micro as well as macronutrient deficiencies. And not only that, a proper public health strategies should be recommended by the government and as well as the health organizations, so that like food fortifications, it could be a proper iodization processes, it could be, and also the health and awareness, the educating. So people who want to follow the plant-based diet, definitely they need to follow certain things, like they definitely this deficient on vitamin B12, or we need to take more increased amount of iron or zinc. So we need to be focusing on the bioavailability, the different techniques, how we can minimize the anti-nutritional factors, or the different preparations or the culinary preparations through which, or the recipes through which we can make the meals much more nutritionally balanced. So these kind of techniques should definitely be implemented by different organizations to spread awareness. And not only that, supplements are also another strategy, but it is not a strategy for everyone, because not everyone are aware of it. First thing, we need to be aware of this particular supplements. Not only that, not everyone can afford the supplements also. So these two are the drawbacks, and I think definitely the public health organizations or the government bodies should come with the right education and awareness regarding the supplements also. That is going to definitely boost the intake of the plant-based diets. So this gives the conclusion, but before that, I would also like to give some more important statistics of plant-based diets. If you see, there are almost 1.5 billion vegetarians worldwide, out of which approximately 75 million are vegetarians by choice of lifestyle and rest due to inaccessibility to meat or unaffordability. So 22% of the global population is vegetarian. Approximately a quarter of Indians follow vegetarian lifestyle. And according to stats for 2022, India has the highest vegan share of 13%. These are stats you can see. So among all the countries, India has the highest share. And there is an interesting campaign called as Veganuary, which is being taken up by the Vegan Society to reduce the consumption of the meat and to increase the plant-based diet consumption. Is that they ask for the sign up, so they encourage people to consume plant-based diet or the vegan diet at least 1 month in a year, that is specifically in the January. So that is called as Veganuary, and we can see the subscriptions for the Veganuary has been increasing year by year, indicating that a lot of people are interested in going towards the plant-based diet. And if we see the rise or fall of vegetarianism, definitely among most of the countries, we can see there is a slight rise in the vegetarianism. And in the initial slides where I've mentioned regarding the Lancet Planetary Health Diet, right? So this is the Lancet Planetary Health Diet or the Lancet Planetary Plate they were talking about, where almost 50% of the plate should be consisting of fruits and vegetables, and the next portion is whole grains, unsaturated plant oils, plant source protein, and a very minimal quantities of dairy foods, animal source protein, starchy vegetables, and added sugars. So the benefit of shifting towards the plant-based diets from the current dietary patterns is that it is going to reduce the premature mortality from non-communicable diseases by 18 to 21%, and is also reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 54 to 87%. And not only that, when a person consumes a diet which contains high intake of sodium, low intake of whole grains, fruits, nuts, seeds, vegetables, they rank among the top 5 dietary risk factors for deaths and dialysis. This is what you can see in this particular graphs here. Okay. And not only that, vegetarians have approximately 14% less risk of cancer, and a study conducted in 2013 showed vegetarians experience 32% less hospitalization due to CVD compared to the meat eaters, and there is significantly low prevalence of type 2 diabetes in people who follow a plant-based diet. And also, according to a study conducted at Oxford University, vegetarian diet is comparatively cheaper than a meat diet, and definitely they can cut down their food bills by 1/3, which has been published in the Lancet. And if someone goes 2 meat-free days per week, we can definitely reduce the meat consumption by 30% reduction can occur. And by switching to vegetarian diet, 75% reduction in the global agricultural land would be achieved. And according to National Food Strategy Report of 2021, 70 times less greenhouse gases is produced by plant-based proteins. And here you can see if someone consumes a 2000 kilocalorie diet, which is high in meat, it is going to release approximately 15.9 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide equivalents. If you see the vegan diet, it's almost more than very much less. It's only 6.4. That's how the plant-based diet is beneficial in terms of the planetary health. And I would like to conclude just with this particular last slide, that all the above mentioned statements call for a need to shift towards healthy and sustainable diets to have lower environmental impact and to provide adequate nutrition for optimal health and disease prevention. Even our Honorable PM, Mr. Narendra Modi, also pledged for net zero by 2070 by saying climate change has to be fought from the dinner tables in every home, which can be done by including sustainable food options like plant-based foods. Each meal counts in the fight for climate change and better planetary health. So we as health professionals can work together in bringing the right dietary transitions for better human health and planetary health. So let's be the change and bring the change. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Rajina ma'am, for giving me this opportunity as well.